I know the smell of burning flesh better than I know the smell of my own wife's perfume. I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. I've smelled it in Humvees, in caves, and in field hospitals. But I never, in a million years, expected to smell it inside my own suburban home. I walked through the front door expecting a welcome home banner. Instead, I walked into a crime scene, and the victim was the only person in this world I actually loved. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The house was too quiet. That was my first instinct. When you spend over a decade in special operations, your brain rewires itself. You don't walk into a room, you scan it. You check corners. You listen for breathing patterns. It's not something you turn off just because you're back on American soil. I had just driven 6 hours from the base, exhausted, running on caffeine and the desperate need to hug my 5-year-old daughter, Ruby. I dropped my duffel bag in the hallway. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. "Ruby," I called out. Silence. "Tessa." Nothing. The air conditioning was humming, but beneath the sterile chill of the house, there was an odor. It was faint, sweet, and sickening. High-end tobacco. Cuban, maybe. And underneath that, something else. Something acrid, like hair and skin that had been too close to a heat source. My stomach turned. I moved down the hallway, my boots silent on the floorboards. I checked the kitchen. Empty. Living room. Empty. Then I heard it. A small, muffled whimper coming from the guest bedroom closet. I moved fast. I didn't run, I glided. I reached the closet door and pulled it open, bracing myself for an intruder. But there was no intruder. There was just Ruby. She was curled up in a ball behind a stack of winter coats, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes wide and terrified. She was shaking so hard her teeth were actually chattering. "Ruby? Honey, it's Daddy. It's Daddy," I whispered, dropping to my knees. I tried to make myself look small, non-threatening. She didn't reach for me. She flinched. She pressed her back harder against the wall, as if she wanted to disappear into the drywall. "No, no, be quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Grandpa says quiet." My blood ran cold. "Grandpa isn't here, baby. It's just me. I'm home." I reached out slowly and took her hand. It was ice cold. I pulled her gently toward me, and that's when she hissed in pain. "Ouch! My back!" she cried out, tears instantly spilling over her cheeks. I frowned, my heart rate spiking from resting to combat ready in a split second. "Let me see, honey. Did you fall?" I turned her around gently. She was wearing a thin pink t-shirt. I lifted the back of the shirt, and the breath left my lungs. The skin on her small back was a map of agony. There were burns. Round, perfectly circular burns. Some were fresh, angry, and blistering red. Others were scabbing over, dark and crusted. And some were old scars, pale and shiny. I counted them automatically. 1, 2, 5, 10, 19. 19 distinct circular marks. I knew exactly what made these marks. I had seen them before in interrogation rooms overseas used by the worst kinds of people. These weren't accidents. These were deliberate. Someone had pressed the lit end of a cigar into my daughter's skin and held it there. I felt a rage so pure and white-hot that my vision actually blurred for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch a hole through the wall. But I forced it down. I locked it away in the box in my mind where I kept the war. Now was not the time for screaming. Now was the time for assessment. "Ruby," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Who did this?" She shook her head violently. "I fell. Mommy says I fell. I have hives. It's allergies." "This isn't allergies, Ruby," I said firmly. "Grandpa played the game," she whispered, looking at the door. "The quiet game. If I cry, I lose." Before I could ask more, the front door beeped. Someone was punching in the code. "Honey, I'm home." It was Tessa, my wife. I pulled Ruby's shirt down just as Tessa walked into the room, carrying 2 grocery bags. She stopped when she saw me, a smile plastering onto her face. "Hunter, oh my gosh, you're back early. I didn't expect you until tomorrow." She dropped the bags and rushed to hug me. I stood up. I didn't hug her back. I felt like a statue. Tessa, I said. She pulled back, looking confused. What's wrong? You look intense. Is everything okay? I pointed at Ruby, who was still cowering in the closet. What is wrong with our daughter's back? Tessa's face didn't show shock. It didn't show horror. It showed annoyance. A flicker of irritation that I was asking questions. Oh, that. She sighed, waving her hand dismissively. I told you on the phone, Hunter. She's developed this terrible skin condition. Eczema or something. She scratches it until it bleeds. The doctor gave us some cream, but she won't stop picking at it. I stared at her. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 7 years. This woman who I trusted with my life. And for the first time, I saw a stranger. Eczema doesn't leave third-degree cauterized burns, Tessa, I said. Don't use your military jargon on me, she snapped, her tone shifting to defensive instantly. She's clumsy, Hunter. She falls. She scratches. My dad, Victor. He looked at it. He said it's just a rash. You've been gone for 6 months. You don't know what's been happening here. You don't get to walk in and judge my parenting. Victor, her father, my father-in-law, the man who smoked imported cigars, the man who always looked at me with a sneer because I enlisted instead of going into banking. I looked at Tessa, really looked at her. Her eyes were shifting. She was nervous. She wasn't worried about Ruby. She was worried about getting caught. She was covering for him. Right, I said. I forced my muscles to relax. I forced a smile onto my face. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm tired. The deployment was rough. I'm seeing threats where there aren't any. Tessa visibly relaxed. She bought it. It's okay, babe. I know you have PTSD and stuff. Just go shower. Dad and Mom are coming over for dinner tonight to welcome you back. Be nice, okay? I'll be nice, I lied. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower to create white noise. Then, I sat on the edge of the tub and put my head in my hands. My daughter was being tortured. My wife was an accomplice. And my in-laws were the executioners. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I had found on the floor of the closet, right where Ruby had been hiding. It was a cigar band. Black and gold. Cohiba Bahaik. One of the most expensive cigars in the world. And on the floor, smudged into the carpet, was a pile of gray ash. They thought I was just a grunt. They thought I was a broken soldier who would believe whatever lie they fed me. They had no idea who they had just declared war on. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. The tired husband was gone. The operator was back. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to call the cops. Not yet. The police would take a report, maybe investigate, but rich men like Victor had lawyers who made things disappear. No, I needed undeniable proof. I needed to bury them so deep that no lawyer could ever dig them out. I opened my tactical bag and pulled out a small black case. Inside were 6 micro cameras and audio bugs I used for urban surveillance training. Tonight was dinner. Tonight, the enemy was coming to my table. And tonight, I would start digging their graves. I heard a car pull into the driveway. A heavy engine. Victor's Mercedes. I gripped the sink, my knuckles turning white. The monster was here. I checked my watch. 1800 hours. The operation begins now. I had exactly 5 minutes before I had to walk out of that bathroom and shake the hand of the man who had burned my daughter. 5 minutes to secure the perimeter of my own home. I moved with the muscle memory of 100 covert ops. I slipped the micro cameras out of their case. They were smaller than a dime, indistinguishable from a screw head or a speck of dust if you didn't know what to look for. I exited the bathroom and moved through the house like a ghost. I planted the first bug behind the family portrait in the hallway, the one where we all looked happy. I slid the second one under the lip of the kitchen island. The third went into the chandelier above the dining table, giving me a bird's-eye view of where the enemy would be eating. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab my weapon, storm the driveway, and end this. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to get sloppy. Hunter? Are you coming down? Tessa's voice floated up the stairs. It was shrill, anxious. Just washing up, honey. I called back. My voice sounded pathetic. Weak. Perfect. I checked the feed on my phone. The cameras were live. Crystal clear 4K video and high-gain audio streaming directly to a cloud server encrypted with military-grade protocols. I took a deep breath, fixed my tired husband's smile, and walked down the stairs. Victor and Fiona were standing in the foyer. Victor looked exactly as I remembered him. A bloated tick of a man in a $3,000 suit that couldn't quite hide his gut. He smelled like expensive cologne and stale smoke. Fiona was next to him, thin and sharp, wearing enough gold jewelry to sink a small boat. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for dust, looking for flaws. There he is, Victor boomed, his voice grating on my nerves. The returning hero. Or should I say, the returning tourist? Heard you guys didn't see much action this time. He extended a hand. I took it. His palm was soft, damp, and weak. I had to resist the urge to crush the small bones in his hand. I could have done it. It would have taken 3 pounds of pressure. Instead, I gave him a limp, weary handshake. It was quiet. Victor. I lied, keeping my eyes low. Just happy to be home. Well, try to make yourself useful now that you're back. Fiona sniffed, not even looking at me. She walked past me into the living room. This place is a mess, Tessa. Look at these drapes. They look cheap. I'm sorry, Mom. Tessa mumbled, scurrying after her. I haven't had time to clean properly with Ruby and... Ruby, Victor grunted. Where's the girl? I watched closely. Victor's eyes weren't looking for a grandchild to hug. They were looking for a target. She's in her room, Tessa said quickly. She's having a bad day. Nonsense, Victor said, marching toward the hallway. She needs discipline, not coddling. That's the problem with this generation. Too soft, just like her father. He shot a look at me. I didn't react. I just slumped my shoulders and walked into the kitchen to get a beer. Let him go, I told myself. Let him hang himself. Dinner was an exercise in torture. We sat around the table, the very table where I had planted the bug. Ruby was sitting next to me. She had changed into a turtleneck sweater, despite it being 70 degrees in the house. She wouldn't look at Victor. She just stared at her mashed potatoes, her small hand gripping her fork so hard her knuckles were white. So, Victor said, sawing into his steak, I've been expanding the vineyard. We're building a new cellar. State of the art. You should see it, Hunter. Though I doubt you'd appreciate the architecture. It's sophisticated. Sounds nice, Victor. I mumbled, pushing peas around my plate. It is nice, Fiona chimed in. She pointed her knife at Ruby. Unlike this child's manners. Ruby, sit up straight. You're slouching like a beggar. Ruby flinched. She straightened her back instantly, wincing as her burnt skin likely rubbed against the fabric of her chair. Sorry, Grandma, Ruby whispered. Speak up, Victor barked, slamming his hand on the table. Ruby dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. I said I'm sorry, she squeaked, tears filling her eyes. Clumsy, Fiona sneered. Just clumsy and weak. I don't know where she gets it from. She looked directly at me. I gripped my steak knife under the table. The handle dug into my palm. Wait. She's tired, I said, my voice flat. Let her eat. You baby her, Victor scoffed. That's why she cries over everything. That's why she has these skin issues. It's stress. She's mentally fragile. The audacity was breathtaking. He was burning her with cigars, and then blaming her reaction on mental fragility. It was the perfect cover. I think I'm going to check the water heater, I said abruptly, standing up. It was making a noise earlier. Go fix things, Victor laughed. It's about all you're good for. I walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and into the garage. I locked the door and immediately pulled out my phone. I wasn't checking the water heater. I was checking the feed. On the screen, I saw the dining room. I saw my empty chair. and I saw the dynamic shift the moment I left. Victor leaned in close to Ruby. He didn't yell. He whispered. The high-gain audio picked it up as clear as a bell. You didn't tell him, did you? Victor whispered. He reached out and pinched her cheek. Hard. Ruby shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Good girl, Victor smiled. Because if you tell him, Daddy goes away. You know that, right? If you talk, the bad men come and take Daddy to jail. And it will be your fault. My stomach dropped. He was using her love for me as a weapon against her. That's why she was silent. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting me. Leave her alone, Dad, Tessa said weakly. Shut up, Tessa, Fiona snapped. He's teaching her resilience. Something you obviously lack. I watched for another hour. I watched them belittle my child. I watched my wife sit there and drink wine while her parents dismantled her daughter's spirit. Finally, they left. I heard the front door close. I heard the Mercedes start up and drive away. I stayed in the garage for another 10 minutes, composing myself. I needed to go back inside and pretend everything was normal. But before I did, I scrolled back on the timeline. I wanted to hear what happened when I was in the shower earlier, right after I planted the bugs, but before I came downstairs. I rewound the footage from the living room camera. The timestamp was 17:55. Victor and Fiona had just arrived. Tessa was in the kitchen with them. I put my earbuds in and turned the volume up. Did he see the marks? Victor's voice. He saw them, Tessa's voice. She sounded panicked. He asked about them immediately. I told him it was eczema. I think he bought it. He's a fool, Fiona said. He's been playing soldier in the sand for 6 months. He doesn't know what's going on. We have to be careful, Tessa whispered. He's not stupid, Dad. He's intense. If he finds out. He won't find out, Victor interrupted. Unless you mess it up. We need him to sign those papers, Tessa. The business is bleeding. We need access to his military pension and that life insurance policy. If he divorces you, we get nothing. I know, Tessa said. Then came the line that turned my blood to ice. Just keep him happy, Victor said. And keep the brat quiet. If she talks, we lose the leverage. Next time he goes on deployment, or if he has an accident, we'll be set. Okay, Tessa said. But no more burns while he's home. Please. It's too risky. Fine. Victor sighed, like he was agreeing to a boring compromise. We'll wait. Be careful, he's back. Do it when he's gone. I took the earbuds out. It wasn't just abuse. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a conspiracy. They were bleeding me dry financially, torturing my daughter to keep her compliant, and planning my accident to cash out my life insurance. I walked back into the house. Tessa was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. She looked up and smiled. A fake, sweet, treacherous smile. Did you fix the water heater, babe? She asked. I looked at her. I looked at her neck, her hands, her smiling face. And I felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculated hatred. Yeah, I said softly. I fixed it. Everything is working perfectly now. I walked past her to check the locks on the doors. I wasn't locking us in to keep the world out. I was locking us in so I could start the hunt. They wanted a war. They just got a nuclear one. The next morning, the house was silent. Tessa was still asleep, likely nursing a hangover from the 3 bottles of wine she and her parents had polished off the night before. This was my window. I walked into Ruby's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight to her chest. When the door creaked, she jumped, her eyes darting to the corner of the room as if expecting a monster. It's just me, baby, I whispered. Put your shoes on. We're going for a ride. Where? She asked, her voice trembling. Mommy said I have to stay inside. Mommy is sleeping, I said, putting a finger to my lips. We're going to see an old friend of mine. He's going to give you some special medicine for your back. Better than what Grandpa gave you. I didn't take her to the family pediatrician. Dr. Eris was a golf buddy of Victor's. He was the one who had written severe eczema on her chart without asking questions. I wasn't making that mistake again. I drove 40 minutes out of the suburbs, into the city, to a small, nondescript urgent care clinic run by a man named Elias. Elias was a former Navy corpsman I had served with in Kandahar. He had patched me up more times than I could count. He was the only man I trusted with this. The waiting room was empty. Elias met us at the door, flipping the sign to closed. "Hunter," he said, shaking my hand with a grip like a vice. "You sounded rattled on the phone. Bring her in." We went to the back room. The smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol filled the air, a smell that usually calmed me, reminding me of safety after a mission, but today it just made me nauseous. I lifted Ruby onto the paper-covered table. "Okay, sweetie," Elias said, his voice dropping to that gentle, soothing tone only combat medics master. "I'm just going to take a look. I promise I won't hurt you." He lifted her shirt. Even Elias, a man who had seen IED blast victims and gunshot wounds, hissed in a breath. He went silent for a long time. He put on his gloves and turned on the magnifying lamp. He examined each mark, his face growing harder and stone-like with every second. "Hunter," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Come look at this." I stepped closer. "See the edges?" Elias pointed with a gloved finger. "Perfectly circumferential. The tissue in the center is necrotic. This isn't a rash. This is a thermal burn caused by a cylindrical object, roughly 50 ring gauge." "A cigar," I said, my voice hollow. "A cigar," Elias confirmed. He stripped off his gloves and threw them in the bin with force. "Some of these are infected, Hunter. The ones near her shoulder blade. They're deep. This is torture. I have to report this. You know the protocol." "I know," I said. "But not yet." Elias looked at me crazy. "Not yet? Hunter, look at her back." "If you call CPS right now," I said, leaning in, my eyes locking with his, "Victor's lawyers will swarm this place. They'll claim it's a medical condition. They have a doctor on their payroll who already diagnosed it as eczema. They'll paint me as the unstable veteran trying to kidnap his daughter. They'll take her back to that house, and I'll never see her again." Elias hesitated. He knew how the system worked for guys like Victor. Money bought innocence. "I need 24 hours, I said. "I'm building a case. I have audio. I have video. I'm going to bury them, Elias. But I need the evidence to be overwhelming. Clean her up. Document everything. Write an official affidavit stating these are burns. Give it to me. And give me 1 day." Elias looked at Ruby, then back at me. He nodded once. 24 hours, Hunter. Then I'm calling the police myself. That's all I need." We drove home in silence. I stopped for ice cream, buying Ruby a double scoop of chocolate. She ate it fast, smiling for the first time in days. It broke my heart. A $5 ice cream cone shouldn't be the highlight of a tortured child's life. When we got back, Tessa was up. She was sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a coffee, scrolling on her phone. "Where were you?" she asked, not looking up. "Park," I said. Ruby needed fresh air. "You shouldn't take her out," Tessa mumbled. "People stare at her skin. It's embarrassing." "I don't care what people think," I said, walking past her. "I have some emails to catch up on." I went into my home office and locked the door. It was time for phase 2. I sat down at my computer. During my time in the teams, I had picked up a few skills. I wasn't a master hacker, but Victor was a 60-year-old man who used the same password for everything. I had seen him type it into his iPad a dozen times. Victor King 1. I logged into his main business accounts. I expected to see wealth. I expected to see millions. What I saw was a graveyard. Red numbers. Everywhere. His successful real estate firm was hemorrhaging money. He had 3 massive loans that were in default. His credit cards were maxed out. Then I found the transfers. Every month, thousands of dollars were being siphoned from my joint account with Tessa, money I sent home from deployment, directly into Victor's shell company. Tessa had been stealing from me for years to prop up her father's failing empire. But it wasn't enough. The hole was too deep. I found an email thread between Victor and his insurance broker. The subject line, Life Insurance Policy, Hunter J. R. If the policyholder dies in an accident within 30 days of return, does the double indemnity clause kick in? Victor had asked. Yes, but the investigation will be thorough, the broker had replied. I leaned back in my chair. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening snap. Victor wasn't just a sadist. He was desperate. He was broke, humiliated, and drowning. Burning Ruby wasn't just cruelty. It was a way to vent his impotent rage at the world. He felt powerless, so he hurt the only person he could control. And Tessa, she was so desperate for Daddy's approval, so terrified of being poor, that she was willing to sacrifice her husband and child to keep the illusion alive. My computer pinged. Motion detected. Living room camera. I switched tabs instantly. Tessa had gone out to run errands. Victor had come over while I was in the office. He must have used his key. I watched the screen, my hand hovering over my mouse. Victor was in the living room. Ruby was sitting on the floor, coloring. Victor was pacing, talking on his cell phone. He looked agitated. He was shouting at someone, probably a creditor. He hung up the phone and threw it onto the couch. He looked down at Ruby. "Stop that scratching noise," he yelled. Ruby froze. She wasn't scratching. She was coloring with a crayon. I said, "Stop it." Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out his cigar case. He didn't light it. He just held the unlit cigar like a weapon. He walked over to Ruby and grabbed her by the arm, hauling her up from the floor. "You're useless," he hissed. "Just like your father. Just a drain on my resources." Fiona walked into the frame. She must have been in the bathroom. She saw Victor gripping Ruby's arm hard enough to bruise. Did she stop him? Did she defend her granddaughter? No. She laughed. A dry, cruel cackle. "Careful, Victor," Fiona said. "Don't mark the arms. It shows too much. Use the back. I'll do what I want." Victor shouted. He grabbed a lighter from the coffee table. He flicked it. The flame danced on the screen. "That will teach her to stop crying," Fiona said, pouring herself a drink from my liquor cabinet. Victor moved the flame closer to Ruby's arm. "Please, Grandpa, no." Ruby screamed. I didn't watch the rest. I didn't need to. I ripped the headphones off. I reached into the drawer of my desk and pulled out my Sig Sauer P226. I checked the chamber. It was empty. I slid a full magazine in and racked the slide. Click-clack. The sound was heavy. Final. I had the medical report. I had the financial motive. And now, I had the video of the assault in progress. I wasn't going to wait for the police. I wasn't going to wait for the courts. Victor wanted to play with fire? Fine. I was about to bring the whole inferno down on top of him. I stood up, tucked the gun into the back of my waistband, and unlocked the office door. I stopped at the hallway threshold. My hand was on the grip of the Sig Sauer tucked into my waistband, concealed by my untucked shirt. Through the archway, I saw them. Victor was looming over Ruby, the lighter flame flickering inches from her arm. Fiona was sipping her drink, watching like it was a television show. Every fiber of my being screamed engage. 2 targets. Close range. Center mass. It would take me less than 2 seconds to drop both of them. But then I looked at Ruby. She was terrified. If I shot her grandparents in front of her, I would traumatize her for life. She would see her father become a killer. And then the police would come. I'd go to prison for double homicide. Ruby would go into the foster system, or worse, to Tessa. No, death was too easy for them. They needed to be dismantled. I took a deep breath, released the grip on my gun, and stepped into the room. "What's going on here?" I boomed. My voice wasn't a question, it was a command. Victor jumped. He actually dropped the lighter. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. He spun around, his face flushing red, then instantly shifting to a fake, oily smile. "Hunter," he exclaimed, spreading his hands. "You sneak up on people." Just having a little talk with Ruby. She was being difficult. I walked past him and scooped Ruby up into my arms. She buried her face in my neck, sobbing silently. She smelled like fear. "She doesn't look difficult," I said, staring Victor down. "She looks terrified." Fiona swirled the ice in her glass. "Don't be dramatic, Hunter. Victor was just showing her a magic trick with the lighter. You know how she loves fire. The lie was so lazy, so insulting, that I almost laughed. Right, I said. Magic tricks. I turned to leave the room, carrying Ruby. Wait, Victor said, his voice dropping the pleasant facade. We need to discuss something. Since you're back, and since money is tight for everyone. I turned back slowly. What about money, Victor? We want to celebrate your return, he said, smoothing his silk tie, and discuss the future. Tessa tells me you're thinking of retiring from the teams. That requires capital. I have a proposition for you. A proposition? Come to the estate tomorrow, he said. The vineyard. I've finished the renovations on the new wine cellar. We'll have a private family dinner. Just us. We can open a bottle of the '82 vintage and talk about how to secure your family's financial future. I looked at him. I saw the desperation in his eyes. This wasn't a dinner invitation. This was a setup. He wanted me at the isolated estate, miles from neighbors, miles from witnesses. He had asked the insurance broker about accidents. He was planning to stage one. It was a trap, and I was going to walk right into it. Sure, I said, keeping my face blank. That sounds great, Victor. A family dinner. We'd love to come. Victor smiled. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood. Excellent. Bring Tessa and the girl. Come around 7. Don't be late. They left 10 minutes later. As soon as the door closed, I locked it. I carried Ruby upstairs and put her to bed. I sat with her until she fell asleep, stroking her hair, promising her silently that the monsters wouldn't hurt her ever again. When I came downstairs, Tessa was home. She looked flustered, carrying shopping bags from stores she definitely couldn't afford. Did my parents leave? She asked, avoiding my eyes. Yeah, I said. They invited us to the vineyard tomorrow night. For a celebration. Tessa froze. She set the bags down on the counter slowly. Her back was to me. Oh, she said, her voice shaking slightly. That's nice. Are we going? Victor said he wants to talk about our financial future, I said, watching her carefully. He mentioned something about my life insurance policy, wanting to make sure we're covered. Tessa spun around. Her face was pale. He just worries, Hunter. You have a dangerous job. He just wants to make sure Ruby and I are safe if something happens. If something happens, I repeated. Right. So, we're going? She asked, her voice tight. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to the garage and opened my secured gear locker. If I was walking into a kill zone, I wasn't going in blind. I packed a go bag, zip ties, a high-lumen tactical flashlight, a signal jammer, and a voice recorder that streamed to the cloud instantly. I pulled up the blueprints of Victor's estate on my laptop. I had found them in his email attachments from the contractor. The new wine cellar he bragged about was deep underground. Reinforced concrete walls, steel blast door, no windows, soundproof. It wasn't a wine cellar. It was a bunker, or a tomb. He planned to get me down there, probably drug the wine or use a weapon, and make sure I never came out. Maybe he'd claim I got drunk, fell, and broke my neck. Or maybe a gas leak. I studied the schematics of the door mechanism. It was an electronic keypad lock with a manual override on the inside, but the override could be disabled from the outside. I smiled in the darkness. Victor thought he was building a trap for me. He didn't realize he had built a prison for himself. I took out my phone and sent a text to Elias. Going dark tomorrow at 1900. If I don't check in by 2200, execute Protocol 0. Location attached. Protocol 0 meant sending the police, the paramedics, and the press. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. In less than 24 hours, the King family dynasty was going to crumble. Victor thought he was the apex predator because he had money and no morals. He was about to learn that there is nothing more dangerous on earth than a father who has seen his child in pain. I cleaned my gun one last time, the smell of oil and metal filling the small garage. See you at dinner, Victor, I whispered. The drive to Victor's estate took an hour. It was 60 minutes of suffocating silence. I drove. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, shredding a tissue into tiny white confetti in her lap. She knew something was wrong. She knew her father was desperate. She probably knew that tonight was the night they were going to push me to sign the papers, or worse. In the back seat, Ruby was strapped into her booster seat, wearing a thick denim jacket. I had dressed her in layers. Not for the cold, but for protection. If things went sideways, I didn't want any skin exposed. We're almost there, Tessa whispered as we turned off the main highway onto the private gravel road. The estate appeared through the trees like a fortress. It was a sprawling pseudo-Tuscan villa surrounded by 50 acres of grapevines that Victor let rot because he couldn't afford the labor to harvest them. The place looked impressive from a distance, but up close, you could see the cracks in the stucco. It was just like Victor, a crumbling facade hiding rot. I scanned the perimeter as we approached. No other cars. No staff vehicles. The gate was open. Textbook. I muttered to myself. What? Tessa asked. Nothing. Just said nice look. I parked the truck facing out. Tactical habit. If we had to leave in a hurry, I didn't want to be backing up. Victor and Fiona were waiting on the front porch. Victor held a glass of red wine. Fiona was smoking a cigarette, her eyes narrowed against the setting sun. Welcome, Victor shouted, his voice booming too loud in the quiet evening. The prodigal family returns. I stepped out of the truck. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I walked around and opened Ruby's door. As I unbuckled her, I leaned in close to her ear. Ruby, listen to me, I whispered. Do not leave my side tonight. If Grandpa or Grandma tells you to go to another room, you say no. You hold my hand. Do you understand? She looked at me, her eyes wide. She nodded. Yes, Daddy. Good girl. We walked up the steps. Victor clapped a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, possessive. Hunter, you look alert, Victor said, his eyes scanning my waistline. I had moved my Sig Sauer to an ankle holster. My waist looked clean. Just hungry, Victor, I said. You mentioned a special vintage? Better, Victor grinned. I want to show you the new cellar. It's finally finished. It's the safest place in the county. Temperature controlled, reinforced walls. It's where we keep the things that matter most. I'd love to see it, I said. We moved inside. The house was cold. They were saving money on heating. We walked through the kitchen to a heavy oak door at the back of the pantry. Victor punched a code into a keypad on the wall. 1-9-8-2. His birth year was 1958, but 1982 was the year he started his company. Typical narcissist. I memorized it instantly. The door clicked open, revealing a concrete staircase leading down into darkness. Ladies first, Victor gestured. Fiona went down, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. Tessa followed, looking like she was walking to her execution. Ruby can stay up here, Victor said, blocking my path as I moved to follow. The steps are steep. She can watch cartoons in the living room. No, I said. My voice was light, but my eyes were dead. She comes with us. It's a family celebration, right? The family stays together. Victor hesitated. He looked at Ruby, then at me. He didn't want to witness, but he didn't want to fight yet. Not until we were downstairs. Fine, he snapped. But if she cries, she goes back up. I picked Ruby up and carried her. We descended. The air got cooler as we went down. At the bottom of the stairs, 20 feet underground, was the bunker. Victor hadn't lied about the construction. It was impressive. Thick concrete walls, no windows, industrial ventilation humming softly. One wall was lined with wine racks, mostly empty. In the center was a heavy wooden table with 5 chairs and a box of cigars. But the most important feature was the door. It was a heavy steel blast door, the kind you see on bank vaults or panic rooms. It had a digital lock on the inside and a manual wheel. Soundproof, Victor bragged, his voice echoing slightly off the concrete. You could fire a cannon down here, and the neighbors wouldn't hear a peep. Is that so? I asked, walking over to the door frame. Security is paramount, Victor said, walking toward the table. Please sit. Fiona, Pour the wine. I lingered by the door for a split second while their backs were turned. I pulled a small, magnetic distinct device from my pocket, a reed switch jammer I used for breaching. I slapped it onto the sensor frame of the door, right at the bottom where it met the floor. It was black, blending perfectly with the rubber seal. The device would prevent the electronic lock from engaging fully if I closed it, unless I triggered the override. But more importantly, it sent a signal to my phone, giving me control of the locking mechanism. "Hunter," Victor called out. "Sit down. We have business." I walked to the table and sat at the head opposite Victor. I placed Ruby on my lap. Tessa sat to my right, shaking. Fiona sat to my left, staring at Ruby with cold, reptilian eyes. Victor opened the cigar box. He pulled out a thick cohiba. He didn't light it. He just rolled it between his fingers. "So," Victor began, his tone shifting from welcoming to serious. "Let's cut the pleasantries. Tessa tells me you're stubborn about the finances. You want to keep your military pension in a separate trust." "I think it's safer that way," I said calmly. "Safety is an illusion," Victor said, tapping the unlit cigar on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Ruby flinched with every tap. She buried her face in my chest. "I need you to sign over the power of attorney to Tessa," Victor said. "Tonight. I have the papers right here." He pulled a folded document from inside his jacket. "And if I don't?" I asked. Victor smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Then we have a problem, Hunter. A big problem. Because this family relies on loyalty. And if you aren't loyal, you aren't family." He looked at Fiona. Fiona reached into her purse. My hand drifted to my ankle. "Is that a threat, Victor?" I asked. "It's a reality," Victor said. He stood up. "You're a soldier. You understand sacrifice. Sometimes, for the unit to survive, the weak link has to be removed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter. The same gold lighter he had used to threaten Ruby yesterday. He flicked it. The flame flared up, illuminating the dark concrete room. "Now," Victor said, his voice dropping to a growl, "sign the papers, or we're going to have a very different kind of party." He thought he had me cornered. He thought he had the power. I looked at the flame. Then I looked at Ruby's terrified face. "You're right, Victor," I said softly. "We are going to have a different kind of party." I stood up slowly, putting Ruby down behind me. "But you're confused about one thing," I said, my voice changing, dropping the tired dad act completely. "You think you're the one in charge because you have the money and the lighter." I took a step forward. "But we're underground, Victor. There are no laws down here. There are no witnesses. And you just locked yourself in a cage with a Navy SEAL." Victor frowned, the lighter wavering in his hand. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the 19 burns on my daughter's back," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the bunker shifted instantly. It went from heavy to suffocating. Victor stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the unlit cigar trembling in his fingers. The confident smirk slid off his face like wet clay. "Excuse me," he stammered. 19. I repeated, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. 19 circular third-degree burns. Some infected, some scarred, all inflicted by a 50-ring gauge cigar. I pointed to the cigar in his hand. "Just like that one." Tessa let out a strangled sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting between me and her father. Fiona went rigid, her glass of wine pausing halfway to her lips. "You're delusional," Victor scoffed, trying to regain his composure. He took a step back, putting the table between us. "The war scrambled your brain, Hunter. The girl has eczema. We've told you this." "Dr. Elias disagrees," I said calmly. "I took her to a specialist yesterday. I have a sworn affidavit stating it is systematic torture. And I have the video from yesterday, Victor. I saw you with the lighter. I heard you." Victor's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You spied on us. In my own house." "My house," I corrected. "I paid for the mortgage. I paid for the car you drove here. I paid for the wine you're drinking. And I know I'm paying for your debts, too." I took a step toward the table. I know about the loans, Victor. I know you're bankrupt. I know you've been siphoning my combat pay into your shell company to keep your pathetic real estate firm afloat. And I know about the life insurance policy. Fiona slammed her glass down. It shattered, red wine spilling like blood across the wooden table. Shut up, she shrieked. You ungrateful grunt. We took you in. We gave you credibility. You gave me a target, I said cold. Victor's eyes narrowed. He realized the game was up. The family dinner facade evaporated. He looked at the heavy brass cigar ashtray on the table, a blunt weapon. He looked at the door. You think you're smart, Victor sneered, dropping the pretense. But you're forgetting where you are. You're on my property. Underground. Nobody knows you're here. He reached into his jacket pocket. And you're not leaving until I get what I want. He pulled out a small, silver pistol. A .22 caliber. A coward's gun. Ruby screamed. Daddy, I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Put the gun down, Victor, I said. You don't know how to use it. I know how to pull a trigger, he shouted, his hand shaking violently. He pointed it at my chest. Sign the papers. Sign them now, or I swear to I moved. It wasn't a fair fight. It wasn't even a fight. It was a correction. I closed the distance in 2 steps. Before Victor's brain could send the signal to his finger, I grabbed his wrist. I twisted it outward, applying torque to the radio ulnar joint. Snap! The sound of his wrist breaking was loud, crisp, and dry like a dead branch. Victor screamed, dropping the gun. I caught it in midair with my left hand before it hit the ground. I kicked Victor in the chest. He flew backward, crashing into the wine racks. Bottles shattered, raining glass and expensive vintage vinegar down on him. He slumped to the floor, clutching his broken wrist, wailing like a child. Victor! Fiona screamed, standing up to claw at me. I turned on her. I didn't touch her. I just looked at her with the eyes of a man who had cleared rooms in Fallujah. Sit. Down. The command carried the weight of death. Fiona froze. She slowly sank back into her chair, terrified. Tessa was sobbing hysterically now, curled into a ball. Hunter, please. Stop. They're my parents. They're monsters, Tessa, I said, ejecting the magazine from Victor's gun and racking the slide to clear the chamber. I tossed the useless weapon into the corner. And you helped them. I reached down to my ankle and drew my Sig Sauer P226. I didn't point it at them. I held it at the low ready. Everyone, stay exactly where you are, I ordered. I walked backward to the steel blast door. I picked up Ruby, who was shaking, and set her down on the other side of the threshold, on the bottom step of the stairs. Stay there, honey. Cover your ears, I told her. Then I stepped back into the room and looked at the 3 of them. Victor groaning in the glass, Fiona trembling in the chair, Tessa weeping on the floor. You wanted to trap me down here, I said. You wanted a tragic accident. You wanted to bury me. I pulled the remote control jammer off the doorframe. The electronic lock beeped, engaging fully. Well, you got your wish, I said. Someone is getting buried tonight. I stepped out of the room. Hunter. No. Wait. Victor screamed from the floor, trying to scramble up. We can make a deal. I have money. I have connections. You have nothing, I said. I grabbed the heavy steel wheel of the blast door. Hunter, please. Tessa shrieked, running toward the door. I'm your wife. I looked at her one last time. You stopped being my wife the first time you watched him burn our daughter and did nothing. I slammed the heavy steel door shut. Clang. The sound was final. I spun the wheel, locking the bolts into place. The screams from inside were instantly cut off. Silence returned to the underground. I looked at the digital keypad. I punched in a new code. One only I knew. I picked up Ruby. She buried her face in my shoulder. Is the bad man gone? She whispered. Yes, baby, I said, kissing the top of her head. He's in a timeout. A very long timeout. I walked up the stairs, carrying my daughter out of the darkness and into the light. But I wasn't done. Locking them in was just the containment. Now came the destruction. I walked back into the kitchen, the adrenaline humming in my veins like a high-voltage wire. I placed Ruby on the living room sofa and put her noise-canceling headphones over her ears. I handed her my iPad with her favorite movie playing. "Daddy has to make a phone call," I told her gently. "You stay here and watch the movie. Don't take the headphones off until I tap you on the shoulder." "Okay. Okay, Daddy," she whispered. She looked small but safe. Finally safe. I walked over to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. Victor had bragged about this smart home integration of his new estate. He had given me the guest Wi-Fi password earlier. That was his mistake. I logged into the local network. It took me less than 2 minutes to find the cellar control node. Victor had installed a high-end audiovisual system down there, a massive projector screen for watching sports, and a surround sound system. He had built a man cave to hide from the world. Now, it was his interrogation room. I pulled up the camera feed. The scene inside the bunker was chaos. Victor was slumped against the wine rack, cradling his broken wrist, his face gray with shock. Tessa was pounding on the heavy steel door, screaming my name. Fiona was pacing, drinking wine straight from a bottle she had uncorked, looking like a trapped rat. I adjusted the volume on my laptop so I could hear them, but they couldn't hear me yet. "He's going to kill us," Tessa sobbed. "He's insane. Did you see his eyes?" "He's not going to kill us," Fiona snapped, though her voice wavered. "He's a soldier. He follows rules. He's bluffing. He broke my wrist." Victor moaned. "The animal broke my wrist." I pressed the microphone button on the control panel. "I didn't break your wrist, Victor," I said into the laptop mic. "I applied a compliance hold. You resisted." My voice boomed through the surround sound speakers in the bunker, amplified and echoing off the concrete walls. They all froze. They looked around wildly, trying to find the source of the voice. "Hunter," Tessa whispered, looking at the ceiling speakers. "Hunter, let us out. Please. We're sorry." "Sit down," I commanded. Tessa collapsed into a chair. Victor groaned, but stayed on the floor. "We are going to play a game," I said, my voice calm and detached. "It's called The Truth. It's very simple. You tell me the truth, and I hand the recording to the police. You lie, and I leave the ventilation off." "You can't do that," Victor shouted. "That's attempted murder." "Is it?" I asked. "Or is it just a tragic accident? The ventilation system failed in your shoddily built bunker." "Tragic." I tapped a few keys. I engaged the screen share protocol on the smart system. Inside the bunker, the massive 80-inch projector screen descended from the ceiling. It lit up. I played the footage from yesterday. The footage of Victor holding the lighter. The footage of Ruby screaming. The footage of Fiona laughing. I watched them watch themselves. Tessa turned away, unable to look. Fiona stared at the screen, her face pale. Victor closed his eyes. "Why?" I asked. "I want to hear it. Why did you torture a 5-year-old girl?" Silence. "I'm waiting," I said. "And the air is getting thin." It was discipline. Victor yelled, trying to regain control. "She's unruly. She needed to learn respect." "Lie," I said. "Try again." I switched the image on the screen. Now, it displayed the PDF documents I had stolen from Victor's email. The bank statements showing the bankruptcy, the foreclosure notices, and the life insurance policy on my name. "I know you're broke, Victor," I said. "I know you stole my combat pay, and I know you were planning to kill me for the insurance money. That's why you invited me here tonight, wasn't it? A fatal accident in the new cellar." Tessa let out a wail. "I didn't know about the accident. I swear, Hunter. He just said we needed you to sign the papers." "But you knew about the burns," I said to her. "You let him burn our daughter because you were afraid of being poor." "He made me," Tessa screamed, pointing at her father. "He told me he'd cut me off. He said I'd be on the street." "Shut up, you stupid girl." Fiona hissed at her daughter. "No, you shut up," Tessa yelled back, finally snapping. "I'm not going to jail for this. Hunter, listen to me. It was them. Mom and Dad. They lost everything in bad investments. They needed your money. They hurt Ruby to stress you out, so you'd be distracted, so you wouldn't notice the missing money from the accounts." "Tessa," Victor roared. "It's true," Tessa cried, looking up at the security camera lens. And Dad said, he said if you had an accident, the insurance pays double. He was going to use the gas line. There's a gas line behind the wine rack. He was going to loosen it and lock you in. My blood ran cold. I had suspected foul play, but hearing it confirmed was sickening. He was going to gas me and blow the house up. Is that true, Fiona? I asked. Fiona looked at Victor, then at the camera. She realized the ship was sinking. She realized Tessa had just handed me a confession on a silver platter. Self-preservation kicked in. It was Victor's idea, Fiona said coldly, taking a sip of wine. He's the one who gambled away the company. He's the one who came up with the plan. I just went along with it. You laughed, I reminded her. When he burned her. I was drunk, she muttered. You're all guilty, I said. I hit the save recording button on my laptop. The file was instantly uploaded to 3 different cloud servers. It was over. I had them on conspiracy to commit murder, child torture, fraud, and embezzlement. Hunter, Victor wheezed, his voice trembling. Hunter, listen. We can work this out. The estate is worth something. Take it. Take the cars. Just open the door. I don't want your money, Victor, I said. I want justice. Who are you calling? Tessa asked, her voice small. I'm not calling anyone. I lied. I already called them. I closed the laptop. I didn't turn the ventilation off. I wasn't a murderer like them, but I left the lights on full brightness. A stark, blinding white interrogation light that would give them nowhere to hide. I stood up and walked over to the sofa. Ruby was still watching her movie, oblivious to the fact that her tormentors had just confessed to their crimes. I tapped her shoulder. She pulled the headphones off. Is the call over, Daddy? Yes, honey, I said. The call is over, and the bad men are never coming back. I picked her up. We walked out onto the porch. Ideally, I would have waited for the police inside, but I couldn't breathe the same air as those people anymore. I saw lights flashing in the distance. Blue and red. Silent at first. Then the sirens started to wail as they turned up the long driveway. Protocol 0 had worked. The cavalry was here. But the war wasn't over. Now came the part one hated most. The lawyers. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires of 3 state police cruisers. Their lights painted the house in strobing flashes of red and blue, cutting through the darkness of the vineyard. I sat on the front steps, my hands resting clearly on my knees, open and empty. I had already secured my Sig Sauer back in the lockbox in my truck. When law enforcement arrives at a high-stress scene, you don't want to be the guy holding a weapon. A sergeant stepped out of the lead car, his hand hovering near his holster. He looked at me, then at the quiet house. Are you the caller? Hunter, he asked, his voice tight. Yes, Sergeant, I said, standing up slowly. I requested Protocol 0. Hostage situation resolved. Perpetrators are contained. The sergeant relaxed slightly, but kept his guard up. You said contained? Where are they? Underground, I said, pointing to the house. In a reinforced concrete bunker. They attempted to extort me, confessed to conspiracy to commit murder, and I have evidence of severe child abuse. I reached into my pocket slowly and pulled out the USB drive where I had saved the video files and the audio recordings. Everything is on here, I said, handing it to him, including a confession that they planned to gas me to death tonight for insurance money. The sergeant took the drive, looking skeptical. And the child? You mentioned a child victim. My daughter, I said, my voice hardening. She's in my truck, asleep. She has 19 third-degree burns on her back. I have a medical affidavit from Dr. Elias waiting for you. The sergeant's face changed. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a grim, professional anger. He signaled his team. Let's get them out. We walked into the house. I led them through the kitchen to the pantry door. The officers drew their weapons as we approached the keypad. It's a steel blast door, I explained. They can't hear us. I have the code. I punched in the override code. The electronic lock beeped. I spun the heavy wheel. The mechanism groaned, the metal complaining as the bolts retracted. I pulled the door open. The smell hit us first. It was a mix of sour wine, sweat, and terror. The scene inside was pathetic. The powerful King family had disintegrated. Victor was curled in the corner, holding his swollen wrist, shivering. Fiona was sitting at the table, staring blankly at the wall, the empty wine bottle in front of her. Tessa was standing near the door, her makeup streaked with tears, looking like a ghost. When the light from the hallway flooded in, they all flinched. "Police!" the sergeant shouted, moving in with his weapon raised. "Hands where I can see them." "Thank God!" Tessa screamed, running toward them. "He locked us in. He's crazy. He broke my dad's arm." She stopped short when she saw the sergeant wasn't looking at me. He was looking at her, and he didn't look sympathetic. "Ma'am, step back and put your hands on your head," the sergeant ordered. "But I'm the victim," Tessa wailed. "He kidnapped us." "We have the recording, ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice flat. "We heard the confession. Get on your knees." "Now." Tessa froze. She looked at me. I was standing behind the wall of officers, watching. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her. "Hunter," she whispered. "Help me." I turned away. The officers moved in. They cuffed Victor first. He screamed in pain as they pulled his arms behind his back, jarring his broken wrist. They weren't exactly gentle with him. "You can't do this." Victor sputtered as they hauled him up. "I know the governor. I have rights. This is a misunderstanding. You have the right to remain silent," an officer said, pushing him toward the stairs. "I suggest you use it." Fiona didn't fight. She walked out like a zombie, her wrists zip-tied. She didn't look at anyone. She knew it was over. Then they grabbed Tessa. As they marched them out of the bunker, passing me on the stairs, Victor stopped. He locked eyes with me. "You ruined us," he hissed. "You ungrateful dog. We made you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single object. It was the cigar he had dropped on the floor, the one he had planned to smoke after I was dead. I tucked it into the breast pocket of his ruined suit jacket. "You dropped this, Victor," I said softly. "You're going to need something to trade in prison." He stared at the cigar, then at me, his eyes filled with pure, impotent hate. "Get him moving," the sergeant ordered. I watched them go. I watched the police drag them up the stairs, out of the darkness they had built for me, and into the harsh reality of the law. I stood alone in the bunker for a moment. I looked at the wine rack where the gas line was hidden. I walked over and checked it. Sure enough, the valve was loose. A wrench was sitting on the shelf behind a bottle of Merlot. Victor hadn't been bluffing. If I hadn't taken control, I would be dead right now. I took a picture of the gas valve and the wrench with my phone as evidence. Then I walked out of the tomb and closed the door. I spun the wheel one last time. Click. I walked out of the house into the cool night air. The police were putting Tessa into the back of a cruiser. She was watching the house, watching for me. When she saw me, she pressed her face against the glass, mouthing words I couldn't hear. "I'm sorry. I love you." It didn't matter what she was saying. The woman in that car wasn't my wife. My wife died the day she chose money over her daughter's safety. That woman was just an accomplice. I walked to my truck. Ruby was awake, looking out the window. She saw the police lights, but she didn't look scared. She looked at me. I opened the door and climbed in. "Where are the bad people going, Daddy?" she asked. "They're going to a place where they can't hurt anyone ever again," I said. "We're safe, Ruby. It's just us now." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Can we go home?" "Yeah, baby," I said, starting the engine. "Let's go home." But as I drove away, watching the police lights fade in the rearview mirror, I knew the real battle was just starting. The arrest was the easy part. Now came the lawyers, the court, and the fight to keep my daughter. Victor had money, even if it was borrowed. He had connections, and snakes like him always had one last bite left in them. We didn't go back to the house that night. That place wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. I drove us to a secure hotel near the base, a place where I knew the staff and the security protocols. Ruby fell asleep in the truck, exhausted by the trauma. I carried her in, her small head resting on my shoulder, and laid her on the crisp, white hotel sheets. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the parking lot, my gun on the table next to me. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's lighter. The next morning, the real war began. It wasn't fought with guns, but with paperwork and forensic exams. I took Ruby to the Children's Advocacy Center at the request of the district attorney. They needed official, law enforcement-grade photographs of the injuries. Watching a stranger photograph my daughter's back was a different kind of torture. Ruby was brave, but she flinched every time the camera shutter clicked. 19. The forensic nurse whispered, marking a diagram. I've been doing this for 20 years, Mr. King. I've never seen precision like this. This wasn't rage. This was recreational. Her words turned my stomach. Recreational. By noon, I was sitting in the office of Assistant District Attorney Miller. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who looked at the file on her desk with a mixture of disgust and determination. We have them on everything, Hunter, Miller said. The video you recorded in the bunker is admissible. The confession regarding the insurance fraud is clear. The gas line evidence seals the intent to kill. But, I asked. I heard the hesitation in her voice. But Victor King has hired Marcus Thorne, she said. He's the most expensive defense attorney in the state. He's already filing motions to suppress the video. He's claiming you illegally detained them, tortured them, and broke Victor's wrist to coerce a false confession. I broke his wrist because he pulled a gun on me. I said, my voice rising. It's on the video. Thorne is claiming the video is doctored, Miller's side. It's a stalling tactic. He wants bail. He wants them out so they can intimidate witnesses. Specifically, you and the child. If they get out, I said, leaning forward, there won't be a trial. Because I will finish what I started. Miller looked at me. She didn't scold me. She nodded. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that. The bail hearing is in an hour. Be there. Look like a grieving father, not a soldier. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters had sniffed out the story. Prominent developer arrested for torture. Victor walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his arm in a heavy cast and sling. He looked frail, old, and pathetic. It was an act. He caught my eye and gave a microscopic smirk. Fiona looked shell-shocked. Tessa was weeping openly, looking at me with pleading eyes. Thorne, the lawyer, stood up. He was slick, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. Your Honor, Thorne boomed. My client is a 60-year-old grandfather with no prior record. He was lured into a dungeon by his son-in-law, a trained killer, and brutalized. The confession was beaten out of him. We request immediate release on recognizance. For a second, I felt a spike of fear. The judge was listening. Victor looked harmless. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, peering over his glasses. The prosecution has submitted a video file. Have you viewed it? It is contextless, Your Honor. Thorne argued. Play it, the judge ordered. The courtroom screens lit up. The audio filled the room. Victor's voice, clear and arrogant. If you had an accident, the insurance pays double. We were going to use the gas line. Then the visual of Victor holding the lighter to Ruby's arm from the day before. The courtroom gasped. The judge's face went stone cold. He watched the video of me breaking Victor's wrist, clearly showing Victor drawing the gun first. The judge turned off the screen. He looked at Victor with pure loathing. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice quiet and dangerous. Your client attempted to murder a veteran and tortured a 5-year-old child. I am denying bail entirely. They are a flight risk and a danger to the community. Victor's smirk vanished. He slammed his good hand on the table. This is a setup. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Take them away, the judge ordered, banging the gavel. As the bailiffs grabbed them, Tessa screamed. Hunter, I didn't do it. I tried to stop them. Tell them, Hunter. I stood up. I looked her dead in the eye across the courtroom. You watched, I said. It was loud enough for everyone to hear. Tessa collapsed as she was dragged out. I walked out of the courthouse, feeling the first breath of fresh air I'd had in days. They were staying in a cage. But as I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Victor owes us 4 million. He said you have the assets now. We are coming to collect. I stared at the screen. Victor hadn't just borrowed from banks. He had borrowed from loan sharks. And now that he was in jail, his debt had just become my problem. I stared at the text message on my phone. We are coming to collect. Victor was a cancer. Even locked away in a cell, his rot was trying to spread to me. He had used my name, my clean record, and my theoretical assets to leverage loans from the kind of men who didn't use lawyers to settle disputes. I looked at Ruby, sleeping peacefully in the hotel bed. I couldn't live looking over my shoulder. I had to end this tonight. I texted back. Victor lied. He has no money. I have no money. Meet me at the abandoned shipping yard on 4th. Come alone, or don't come at all. I knew they wouldn't come alone. That was the point. I drove to the yard, leaving Ruby under the watch of an ex-military buddy of mine who lived near the hotel. I arrived 10 minutes early. I scouted the terrain. I checked the sightlines. At midnight, a black SUV rolled in. 3 men got out. They were big, wearing leather jackets and expressions that screamed violence. The leader was a bald man with a scar running down his cheek. I stepped out of the shadows, my hands empty, but my body coiled. You Hunter? The leader asked, stepping forward. He had a crowbar in his hand. I am, I said, my voice steady. And you're wasting your time. Victor owes us 4 million, the leader spat. He said you were his partner. He said you have the access codes to the offshore accounts. Victor is a liar, I said, taking a step closer. He's in solitary confinement for torturing a child. There is no money. There are no offshore accounts. He played you, just like he played the banks. The leader sneered. I don't care. Someone pays. If it ain't him, it's you. He raised the crowbar. I moved. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. I sidestepped the swing, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to drive his face into the hood of his SUV. I twisted his arm behind his back until he cried out. The other 2 men reached for their waistbands. Don't, I said, applying just enough pressure to the leader's shoulder to make him scream. I am a Tier 1 operator. I have killed men in their sleep in countries you can't find on a map. If you pull those guns, you die here. Tonight. And nobody will ever find you. The 2 men froze. They looked at me, then at their boss pinned to the hood. They saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't fear. It was boredom. Victor King is yours, I whispered into the leader's ear. He's in county. He has a nice watch collection hidden in his safe at the office. Go take it. But if you ever come near me or my daughter again, I will burn your entire organization to the ground. I shoved him away. He stumbled back, rubbing his shoulder. He looked at me with newfound respect and fear. We're good, he muttered. He signaled his guys. They got in the car and peeled out. I watched them go. One loose and tied. Now for the others. The next few weeks were a blur of legal victories. With the loan sharks scared off and the evidence overwhelming, the prosecution moved fast. I sat in the visiting room of the state penitentiary a week later. I didn't have to go, but I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. Victor was brought in. He looked terrible. His silver fox hair was matted and yellow. His broken wrist was in a cheap splint. He had lost 20 pounds. But the worst part was his face. It was covered in bruises. He sat down behind the glass. He refused to look at me. I heard you're having a hard time in there. Victor, I said into the phone. He looked up. His eyes were haunted. They know, he whispered. Everyone knows. The guards told the inmates. They call me the burner. They put cigarettes out in my food, Hunter. They wake me up at night. Karma is a mirror, I said. You burned a helpless girl. Now you live in a world of fire. Help me, he begged, tears streaming down his face. Get me into protective custody. Please. I'll sign anything. I'll give you the hidden accounts. I don't want your money, I said. I told the guys you owe money to where your watch collection is. I think that debt is settled. Victor's face went white. He knew what that meant. He had nothing left. And Tessa? He asked weakly. Tessa is in the women's unit, I said. She took a plea deal yesterday. 25 years. She testified against you to save herself from a life sentence. She blamed it all on you, Victor. Your legacy is dead. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I stood up and walked out. The trial sentencing was a formality. The judge, the same one who denied bail, threw the book at them. Victor, life without parole. Fiona, life without parole. Tessa, 25 years. I stood in the back of the courtroom as they were led away. Tessa looked back one last time. She looked broken, aged 10 years and 10 days. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt light. The weight was gone. The threat was neutralized. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Ruby was waiting for me on a bench with my sister, who had flown in to help. Ruby saw me and jumped up. She ran to me, her little legs moving fast. I caught her and swung her around. She was laughing. A real laugh. Not the terrified, quiet mouse she had been weeks ago. "Is it done, Daddy?" she asked. "It's done, baby," I said, holding her tight. "They are never coming back." "Can we go to the lake now?" she asked. "You promised." "I promised," I smiled. "Let's go." I looked back at the courthouse one last time. The system had worked, but only because I had forced it to. I had walked into the fire to save my daughter, and we had both walked out. Scared, scarred, but alive. We didn't count the days after the trial. When you survive a war, you don't celebrate the dates of the battles. You just celebrate the quiet that comes after. I sold the suburban house immediately. I sold it for under market value just to get rid of it. I left everything inside. The furniture, the drapes Fiona had picked out, the dining table where we had eaten those poisonous dinners. It was all tainted. We moved north, far north. I bought a small A-frame cabin near a lake in Montana, surrounded by pine trees and silence. It wasn't a fortress, but it was ours. The transition wasn't like in the movies. Ruby didn't just wake up one day and forget. For the first few weeks, she would check the closets for Grandpa. She would ask if Mommy was coming to visit. "Mommy is in a timeout," I would tell her, holding her until her breathing slowed. A grown-up timeout. "She can't come here." Then came the letter. A thick envelope arrived from the State Women's Correctional Facility. The handwriting was Tessa's, shaky and desperate. To Hunter and Ruby. I stood by the mailbox at the end of our dirt driveway, the wind biting at my face. I could see the pages inside, dense with writing. Probably apologies. Probably excuses. I didn't open it. I pulled out my lighter, a cheap plastic one, not a gold one like Victor's, and clicked it. I held the flame to the corner of the envelope. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I dropped it onto the gravel and let it burn until it was nothing but dust. That was the last time Tessa ever entered our lives. As the seasons turned, Ruby began to heal. The physical scars on her back were fading from angry red to a pale, silvery white. But the mental scars took longer. One evening, a blizzard knocked out our power. The cabin was freezing. I knelt by the stone hearth to build a fire. Ruby stood by the door, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with terror. To her, fire was a weapon. It was pain. "Come here, Bug," I said softly. "I want to show you something." "No," she whispered. "It hurts." "Not this fire," I promised. "Fire is like a guard dog. If a bad man uses it, it bites. But if a good man handles it, it protects you. It keeps the wolves away. It warms you." I struck the match. The wood crackled. The orange glow filled the room, chasing away the shadows. "Come feel," I said, holding out my hand. She took a hesitant step, then another. She sat on my lap. We watched the flames dance behind the metal screen. Slowly, her trembling stopped. She leaned her head against my chest, feeling the warmth radiating from the hearth. She fell asleep right there. She had reclaimed the thing that had been used to hurt her. We didn't have millions of dollars. The lawsuit against Victor's estate yielded very little because the banks took everything first. But I had my pension, and I picked up work training local law enforcement. It was enough. We had food. We had the lake. We had peace. Sometimes, I think about Victor in his cell. I think about him shivering on a thin mattress, surrounded by men who know exactly what he did to a child. I think about Tessa, watching her youth rot away in a gray cage. I don't feel happy about their suffering. I don't feel sad. I just feel indifferent. They are ghosts, and ghosts can't hurt us anymore. One morning, the sun broke through the winter clouds, hitting the lake and turning the ice into a sheet of diamonds. Ruby ran outside in her snow boots, laughing. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand. My Sig Sauer was locked in the safe, but I checked the perimeter out of habit. Clear. Daddy, look, Ruby yelled. She dropped into the snow and flapped her arms, making a snow angel. She wasn't afraid to lie on her back anymore. I walked down and lay in the snow next to her. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean. We looked up at the vast, open blue sky. I love you, Daddy, she said. I love you too, Ruby. We won, didn't we? She asked. I squeezed her mittened hand. Yeah, baby, I said, closing my eyes. We won. Call to action. The story of Hunter and Ruby ends here,